Hey everybody, this is Fred from WP Shout, and this is the second in our up and running live webinar Q&A sessions, where we talk about, in this case, topics from the second third of up and running, but also just WordPress development topics in general. Okay, so the most recent thing we were talking about was, do I use advanced custom fields? Yes, I really like the advanced custom fields plugin. For any custom fields that only need to be registered on one website, as opposed to like you're writing custom fields into a plugin that like hundreds of people could be using. If it's just going to be on one website, then ACF is I think very much the easiest way to work with custom fields. Robert asks, does ACF have an impact on the speed of a WordPress site? Yeah, technically it does. ACF is going to save custom fields into the database. Well, sorry, my wife is making lunch. ACF is going to save custom fields into the database, whereas some other solutions you might use, such as CMB2, if you're registering your custom fields with PHP, that's going to be a faster process. Reading out those PHP files is going to be a faster process than fetching a whole bunch of database values that ACF has pushed into the database, fetching them out, and then registering the custom fields that way. So yeah, technically ACF slows the site down a little bit, but with site performance, everything with site performance is a trade-off. You want to be thinking about what's going to get you big performance wins before you heavily optimize kind of the things that have a smaller impact on performance. So does registering 5 ACF fields for your pages slow your site down? Not enough to ever notice. It's like probably 1,000th the effect of like switching from bad hosting to good hosting, or actually getting a caching plugin running, or making sure you don't have 5 megabyte images on your homepage. Like, do the easy things first, and then if your site is still too slow, you can start doing the hard stuff. But I've never worked on a site where ACF was causing such a slowdown that I felt the need to use something else. Okay, what else? So I'll take questions either by chat, or if you want to unmute yourself, you can actually just ask your question verbally. Robert asks, do I recommend a plugin to speed up a WordPress site? Well, if you're using the hosting I recommend, which would be SiteGround or Kinsta, those both have their own caching solutions. SiteGround's caching solution does bundle with a plugin which used to be called SG Optimizer, and I can't remember what it's called, but basically if you create a WordPress install through SiteGround, it'll kind of automatically come with a plugin that you can use to flush the SiteGround cache and do a number of other helpful things. So in terms of like third-party caching plugins like W3 Total Cache or those kind of things, those mostly apply to hosts that don't have good WordPress caching solutions kind of built in. You wouldn't necessarily want to put one of those on top of the caching solutions that Kinsta or SiteGround offer you. So for example, WP Shout is on Kinsta, and we don't use a third-party caching plugin because of Kinsta's caching solution. It would sort of be redundant with Kinsta's caching solutions. However, we do use something called Optimize, a plugin called Optimize, which is a very, very good plugin for site speed. What it does is it basically combines and minifies JavaScript and CSS files. So what Optimize will do is it'll take your server request down from like 100 to maybe 40 or something, because every separate JavaScript file that your WordPress site needs to pull in is a separate request to the server, and the same with CSS files. So if you have a large site and you're pulling in 30 JavaScript files and 20 CSS style sheets, each one of those is its own request to the server, and that has a real impact on site speed. So what Optimize does is it pulls all those things into one file and minifies it, meaning a variable that used to be called my width is now called like L or something. So it just kind of almost like zips up the size of the files, but the most important thing it does is it combines them, so it's just one request to the server. So Optimize is really worth using for site speed, in my opinion. Other than that, site speed is a big topic, and you have to there's a lot of stuff you can be doing either well or badly from the standpoint of not having huge images on the site, or not, not coding your queries inefficiently and that kind of thing. There's a thing called Query Monitor that if your site is behaving oddly slowly, you can use this plugin Query Monitor to see if there are slow queries running, and you might realize that WooCommerce is doing something really really heavy that's taking like a second on every page load. But yeah, site speed is a huge topic, but having good hosting and the auto-optimized plugin are two good-ish places to start, I would say. Okay, what else?
Hey, Fred. This is Kevin in Fort Collins, Colorado.
Oh my God, Kevin, hi.
Yeah, hey, how you doing?
How's Fort Collins?
Good. Man, it's been an incredible week in terms of weather. So lots of dog walking and staying away from people.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds ideal. That combination sounds almost perfect.
Yeah, it's supposed to snow tomorrow though, so.
Oh, okay.
70 today, snow tomorrow.
Sounds like, I grew up in Fort Collins for everybody here. Yeah. Okay, so what can I help with?
Just more, not really a question, but more of a statement that if you're looking for things to talk about, something I've run into a lot is on sites that I've administered, people creating custom plugins or whatever that depend on custom post types that are created outside of the plugin, like an ACF or CPT or something like that. Is that something that you've run into a lot? And do you have any like words of wisdom on that kind of dependency management?
Good question. So yeah, you could run into a situation where, let's say I'm working on your site and the site's been around for 5 years, and you're a site that does movie reviews, and 5 years ago somebody registered a movie reviews post type in your theme, and then I'm writing a plugin that talks to the movie reviews post type like it's always going to be there. And technically you are kind of like, technically your plugin is kind of a little bit out on a limb if you do that. In other words, if you changed your theme, or if you stopped doing movie reviews and you started doing book reviews or something, and you got rid of the movie reviews post type, my plugin would just kind of start breaking. It might even break your site. Something that's really, I would say, important to think about in WordPress development in general is, hey, by the way, anybody tell me if the cooking noises in the background are like getting in the way of your listening, and I'll buy a new house and move there really quickly. No problem. Okay, good to know. So one thing to really think about in WordPress development in general is this just for one person's website, or is this like across multiple websites, potentially hundreds? So like at the far end of that spectrum, right, would be like, I have written a commercial theme that I want thousands of people to buy, or I've written a commercial plugin that I want thousands of people to buy. And what you need to be doing under those circumstances, you need to take everything seriously under those circumstances. So if you write a commercial plugin, let's say, you have to know front to back WordPress security, or you're putting people at risk. You have to register hooks, action and filter hooks, so that other developers can work with your software. It's not enough for you to just make it run. You need to put in hooks so that they can change its functioning without editing your plugin. You need to probably write in an object-oriented way that nestles everything within classes so that your code is actually comprehensible to other people. All of those things are super important if you're releasing things commercially, or maybe in the middle of the spectrum would be like, hey, this is going out to a school district and there's 50, or there's 50 middle schools and high schools running this same plugin, right? So in those cases, you really have to take managing dependencies seriously, and there's just the overall quality of your code can't take anything for granted. You can't assume people are running their website on good hosting. You can't assume what theme they're running it on. You can't assume the sort of the other plugins that might be in that environment. So this is one kind of set of considerations when the code you're writing is going out to multiple people in an environment you don't control. Over here, at the very far end of that spectrum, is where I've done most of my work. which is writing single-use software for one client. And in that situation, you have a lot more leeway. Like when I write a custom plugin that, uh, creates a PDF version of, like maybe they write, they have a custom post type called reports, and they need help creating a PDF version of the report that their users can download or something. I'm not registering like do action and apply filters hooks, because I know there's not going to ever be another developer touching this stuff other than me. So from within that context of just like a single use code, it's a little bit less important to think about like, oh, is my plugin, does my plugin have as a dependency another plugin? Or does my plugin have as a dependency the current theme that's running? Because it's basically going to be, me resolving those dependencies if they change. Or if it's not me, it'll just be one other developer who, I can explain the situation to. So yeah, I would say that, doing client work for one person, you don't have to be as vigilant. But if you are starting to, and this is kind of the answer I gave to the advanced custom fields question a little bit earlier, ACF is wonderful for, once again, single-use code. If I'm just registering this post type for this website, that's great. But if I'm writing a plugin that must have a custom post type running, and that plugin is going to be installed in multiple environments that I don't control, then I actually have to register those custom post types in the plugin itself. And I have to do that with PHP. I can't do it with advanced custom fields. So is that kind of getting at the question, Kevin? And would you like me to kind of hone that answer a little bit more?
No, yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm a web developer at a company that has nothing to do with web development,
Yeah.
So kind of more to the single client thing. But one thing I worry about is like we don't have time to do good documentation and stuff like that. So if I get hit by a bus or win the lottery and I go away, the next person just has to go in and learn the way I've done everything. And so I've sort of adopted like kind of defensive programming, like if this post type, because we also have a lot of dependencies between themes and plugins, which is something I'm trying to resolve, but
right.
So I say like, hey, if this post type doesn't exist, then whatever, send the admin an email and don't do what you're supposed to, fail gracefully.
Yes.
Yeah, I would totally choose the lottery option.
Yeah. Hopefully not both.
Yeah, right. That'd be a overwhelming day. So yes, that did answer my question. Thank you.
Yeah, and that added context helps. I would say, commenting your code is really helpful if somebody has to wade through it in 2 years. And yeah, I mean, I think if you, to the extent you can, like pulling theme creepy things out of your theme is, you're doing a favor to yourself in 2 years or to the next developer. So in other words, if a theme is registering data types, like a custom post type or something like that, and you're going to, like, if a client has $2,000 to work with and they have a developer 5 years ago who registered a custom post type in the theme, I'm just going to leave it there. But, if I'm working on the same project for months on end and I would like to leave like an actually clean, sensical kind of code environment behind when I move on to another project, I would go through and, pull custom post types out of the theme, try to try to resolve dependencies so that in theory you could actually change themes without breaking data. So yeah, so it's commenting your code, pulling theme overreach into new plugins that you register, and just sort of being consistent with naming. Like all the plugins you write, should start with like company name so that somebody can know what you wrote versus what you didn't. Just all that kind of stuff. And good inline commenting in your code. And yeah, I think I don't have too much more to say about that, but I think other people would, like if David was on the line, he would probably have some thoughtful things to say about, version control and other kinds of things. The truth is that mostly it's a conversation between me and a client. It's rarely a conversation between, me being mostly full-time on one project for a year and then a developer is going to, take my place in 3 years' time. So I think it would be good if you are slightly more responsible than I'm used to being with mostly small business clients. Yeah, I'm starting to repeat myself. Okay, who else has a question? Do I create custom Gutenberg blocks? Have I ever created a custom Gutenberg block? No, I have not. Will I in the next 5 years? Probably, as Gutenberg continues to get better. Where I'm at with Gutenberg right now is, first of all, I've been really delighted and excited that Gutenberg hit WordPress core, because I think we need a unifying language for layout, for creating content and for layout creation. So like the fact that we have like a standard that's in core, and we're no longer like, we have an alternative to just branching out into like 20 different realities defined by Visual Composer and Divi and Beaver Builder and Elementor and Oxygen and whatever, is like huge to me. But in terms of where Gutenberg itself is at right now, I think it's a toss-up as to whether it's a better post-creation experience than the classic editor. I think for some kinds of things it definitely is. So in maybe a third of the articles I write on WP Shout, I use the block editor because I need to do something like put two images next to each other or something like that. But if I'm just writing an article that doesn't have like layouts that the classic editor is not good for, I'll use the classic editor because it's just, I'm so familiar with it. And I know all its quirks. So for me, for me, the Gutenberg editor is sometimes better than the classic editor for like just post creation, and sometimes it's the other way around. But a page builder is always better than both for complex layout creation. So if I'm creating a home page or a landing page or any page, with kind of anything that sits next to another thing horizontally, as opposed to just a post that might have one kind of little piece of layout. If there's anything that's intricate, I'm using Beaver Builder. And so from that standpoint, pretty much all of the use cases I would have for creating custom Gutenberg blocks are instead me doing some combination of like Beaver Builder modules and perhaps registering custom shortcodes and doing it that way. So as of now, no, I haven't had a use case to create a custom Gutenberg block, but I expect that will change. And the big thing that would change in terms of my use of WordPress, the big thing that would change that is if somebody finds a way to create a Beaver Builder-like experience on the front end with complex layouts, rows and columns and modules. If somebody finds a way to do that, but using Gutenberg blocks as kind of the basic element of that, then I would really start using Gutenberg in earnest. And then yes, I personally would get much deeper into understanding the coding side of Gutenberg. So yeah, that's just me. I think different people are in different places on this for different reasons, but that's where I'm at. Matt asks, I have a similar question about blocks. I'm new to WordPress and built a theme using all custom HTML blocks to make my site look exactly how I want. I found the standard blocks could not do exactly what I wanted. I'm going to manage the site, but I want to make it more user-friendly. Should I learn how to build my own Gutenberg blocks? I know I would need to learn JavaScript and React deeply. Great question, Matt. So I think you have two options. I think time spent learning how to register custom Gutenberg blocks, as well as time spent learning React and JavaScript deeply, as you're saying, is time well spent. So if your goal is to learn, then yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I think if you registered a custom block for everything that the site is doing, then I think you would find yourself in a good position. I think the site would be user-friendly at that point. I think you would succeed in creating a user-friendly site that's oriented around Gutenberg blocks. So if your goal is to learn, I think, yes, that's a great idea. If your goal is to be done with the site and just like leave a user-friendly site behind, but kind of if your goal is to get to where you want the site to be with a minimum of effort, I would suggest learning Beaver Builder. And depending on how many blocks the site has, you may be able to recreate them with Beaver Builder. And then you would just need to do some amount of Beaver Builder training for the person who will be managing the site. So yeah, I think the cool way to do it would be to turn all this custom HTML you've got into Gutenberg blocks and learn React and JavaScript and PHP and stuff along the way. And if you've got the bandwidth for that, I think it's a great idea. If you just kind of want to hand off a done site that people can manage, then I would suggest actually kind of redoing stuff in Beaver Builder, training yourself in Beaver Builder, and then training the site owner in it as well. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. What else? And feel free to unmute yourself at any point if you like. Everything you've always wanted to know about WordPress development. Robert asks, what do I use to track domain names? When you say track domain names, are you saying like track whether they've been registered, or like, is that what you mean, or what does that mean? What do I use to, Robert, I can hear you, go ahead.
Yeah, I have way too many domain names registered for my own purposes that are doing nothing. But the biggest problem is they tend to come back around, and I always find myself too close to the deadline for renewing them. And then they go back on the back boiler for another year. And it is one of my biggest headaches. This morning I got up and I saw an email going, this is about to renew in a couple of days' time. And I thought, oh, geez, there's one I don't want to renew, most definitely. I just want done with that. But I could have ended up paying for another years of domain registration. And particularly now when things are tight, because our business is effectively closed, because we primarily deal with hotels and they're out of business. So any expense is an expense I can do without. So finding a better way for tracking the domain names I've registered is something that's very much to the front of my mind. And I was just wondering if you or anybody else actually that's online at the moment have any suggestions. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I would too. So if anybody has a good answer to that, just go ahead and unmute yourself. I mean, my 2 cents would be, I don't have some sort of meta system for tracking domain names I've registered. Lisa says I put domain name expirations onto her Google Calendar, which I think is a great idea. So if you wanted to just kind of like spend an afternoon, first of all, how many domain names are we talking about? Are we talking 20, 50, 100, 1,000?
Probably somewhere between 50 and 100.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so you could sort of spend part of an afternoon just seeing, okay, when is this one expiring? And you could maybe even deregister the ones that you're sure you don't want to renew. And then you could, for the 30 that you do want to keep, you could just kind of put their expiration date all through your Google Calendar. That's kind of a cool idea. I mean, one thing that's definitely would be helpful is, I'm hoping you're using the same registrar for all these. So it's not like you're, having to be in 10 different registrars interfaces.
3.
Okay, 3, yeah. You can also, I think you can, is it true that you can register them for more than 12 months at a time? That would just sort of like, kind of give you some.
In only one of the registers I'm using. The other 2, they take over year by year, which is frustrating. But yeah, if it was an option, I'd definitely do that.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I think Lisa's answer is pretty much taking the cake on this one. If you can just kind of put it into your personal calendar and make sure that Google Calendar gives you an alert. You can set Google Calendar events to like notify you 2 weeks before something happens or something. I mean, I found that,
keep it simple.
Yeah, I mean, domain name registrars want your money. So I found that they're very insistent. Like they'll send you an email a month before and then 2 weeks before, and then they'll be like, your thing's about to expire, So I found the volume of email that they send me when a domain's about to expire to be enough, but I'm also not working with with that quantity of domains. So yeah, I think Lisa's advice is pretty good.
Cool.
Yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? That's my method. Anything you want to know about WordPress development? Especially about, as we talked about, if there's anything in up and running, like a chapter that's like, what is this talking about, then I'd be happy to get into the specifics. But more broadly, anything. Julius writes, I would like to learn how to add cool JavaScript effects to elements. Do you have any websites that you use for inspiration? Good question. Not particularly. I think this is an unpopular opinion, but I've always liked like W3 schools as like basic training. Here I'm typing. Here I'm going to share my screen actually. First, my understanding is a lot of people really dislike W3 schools, but I'm not actually sure why that is. Let's see. Okay, I'm trying to start a screen share here. Okay, cool. So yeah, like, so for adding JavaScript, visual JavaScript effects, you're mostly going to want to be using jQuery as opposed to vanilla JavaScript. So if you don't already know jQuery, that's the place to start. And yeah, honestly, I would probably go through the W3 schools as jQuery training. Like they have these nice little code pens here where, you know, you can try stuff yourself, right? So you do this and then they should have, yeah, well, they should have a thing where you can actually be in the code. Yeah, so this is really what I like about them. It's like, okay, so I'm gonna run this, right? When I click this, okay, so start animation. So it goes 250. But if I wanna say 450 and then I run it and then I click it, you know? So it's like you can really get your hands into how jQuery works probably by going through this tutorial. So yeah, that would be where I would start. It's probably with the W3 Schools jQuery tutorial and just getting into their little try it yourself thingies and changing numbers and see what happens. Is that helpful? Cool. What else? And Julius, I guess just since I'm thinking, one thing I'll caution against is, oh, good. Yeah. I want to say your name right. Is it Damash or Damashe? Damashe? Longy. Damashe. Okay, cool. Damashe gives a thumbs up for W3 schools, so it's not just me who thinks they're good. And one thing I will say is those JavaScript effects are super fun, but just make sure that you're staying within the bounds of good taste, you know? Like, you know, when I'm looking at websites or looking at themes or something like that, and I'm scrolling down the page and like each part of the page is like fading in, like, are you gonna wait? Come on, wait. Okay, now you know, and then it's like, you know, everything you've ever needed in a WordPress theme, and like the button bounces in from the right, and it's like get start. You know, it's like, like I just know this theme is like held together with duct tape, and you know those things do carry kind of a performance cost, and they can kind of gum up the user experience. So it's really exciting to learn those things, and it's also sort of important to stay in the bounds of kind of like a good user experience as you're implementing them. Julius asks, is there a benefit to using CSS animations versus JavaScript animations? That's a good question. If you can use a CSS animation, you should. In other words, JavaScript animations can do much more complex things than CSS animations can. So just to give you an example, like, you know, I could click, like if I click this image, if I hover my mouse over this image, then, you know, this button like kind of transitions from green to red or something like that. That's usually going to be JavaScript. Like there are limits to how creative you can be with CSS. Actually, that particular thing I just described, you could probably do in JavaScript, in CSS, but there are limits to what you can do with CSS animations. And so it's very good to learn CSS animations. Like if you're just trying to like hover a button and you want it to sort of glow a different color, you know, over the course of a quarter second or something like that, you can do that with CSS. And it's better because you're not having to load in JavaScript, like external JavaScript files. It's going to be faster. It's just kind of a cleaner, you have fewer dependencies is maybe a good way to say it. But yeah, there are limits to what you can do with CSS, and that's where like something like jQuery comes into play. Yeah, so there are problems. Everything has its place. If you can do it in PHP, that's good. And then obviously, you know, front end things like user interactivity things are either going to be CSS or JavaScript. So if you can do it with CSS, that's good. And then some things you kind of have to use JavaScript. That's how I think about it. What else?
Is it okay? Is it okay if I ask another question?
I would love that.
Yeah, great. So I know on WP Shout you guys are like big fans of Beaver Builder, but I kind of against my will have been forced to start working with the Oxygen page builder. Is there? You probably cover this in some of your articles, but could you tell me why you prefer Beaver Builder over the other, popular or up-and-coming page builders?
Good question. I actually have not used the Oxygen Builder in depth, and I keep hearing about it. So there's a chance that it's very, very good. Have you found it to be good?
Yes, it's very developer oriented, which is I like a lot. I much prefer to do custom development for the type of problems that I have to solve. But it also, I have trouble with it because so much stuff lives outside of your actual PHP code, so you can't put it in version control and things like that. If you get a corrupt database, like you really lose everything, So those are my concerns with using it. And it does have a learning curve for sure.
Gotcha. So I'm presuming that you would have those same complaints and then some with other page builders, correct? So in other words, you're not worried about what you just said with respect to Oxygen, you're worried about it with any page builder. Is that correct?
Actually, Oxygen is the first like real page builder I've used, so I guess so based on what you just said.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, so I think there's a good chance Oxygen is very good, and I just haven't tried it. So I really want to give that. I want to leave that possibility open, and trying Oxygen is somewhere vaguely on my to-do list. I feel less urgency about it because I love Beaver Builder so much. Hey, and I'm going to share my screen again. Let me just apologize to everybody who's like biting down hard because of how many tabs I have open. This is just kind of the way my life is. So, yeah, some people, I've never had a one-to-one conversation with somebody that involved me sharing my screen where they didn't comment on how many tabs I have open. So I feel like I'm pretty far out along the distribution curve on that, and let me apologize. So why do I love Beaver Builder? So this is a site that I'm working on with my wife, and pretty much everything you're looking at was very easy to do in Beaver Builder. And I actually think I demoed this last time we spoke last week, but how did I come to the design of this site? It was kind of a design challenge I set myself to mimic as completely as I could this Squarespace template that I really, really love. So I'll just show you the source of this. Like this Thrive Meditation Coaching site is on Squarespace, and I kind of set myself a design challenge to basically get that same design, but in a WordPress context where it's obviously much more powerful and you can do much more with it. And there was essentially no problem doing that with Beaver Builder. So I kind of won't go into detail about how I did all this, but this was probably an hour of work, maybe 2 hours of work. And so it's just kind of like, yeah, I mean, this is such a massive leap forward in my ability to, I'm getting some comments about my browser tabs. Kevin says, at least you can still see the icons, LOL, which is right. I feel like I've lost the icons a couple times, and I knew that I actually had crossed that thin threshold into madness. So yeah. And both Julius and Kevin say, try using the Great Suspender, which I have installed in the past. You basically click it and it condenses all your Chrome tabs into one. Yeah, I like that, but somehow I stopped using it after a while. I'm not sure why. But yeah, I would recommend other people try the Great Suspender, lest they end up like me. So in terms of Beaver Builder, it's just like, how am I going to build that layout without a tool like this. Like, what am I going to use? Like widgets, or I'm going to like hard code the homepage, and then, you know, if my wife wants to change something, she can't. She doesn't have the ability to change it without learning like PHP and HTML and stuff. It's like there's nothing out there that gives me the ability to create that homepage exactly the way I want it that works. Robert asks, can you save sections in Beaver Builder as reusable modules? The answer is yes. You can save a module, you can save a row, you can save an entire layout. So if you wanted to copy an entire page over to another page, you totally could. Matt asks, does Beaver Builder use CSS Grid and Flexbox? That is a question that I don't know the answer to. Let me just go ahead and drop changes here, and let's look at the code. I actually think the answer to both of those may be no. I think it kind of uses its own, I think it uses its own way of thinking about layout. Let's see. No, it's using Flexbox, yeah. So the row content is flexed. So yeah, it seems definitely to use Flexbox in the way it thinks about layouts. Does it use CSS Grid? I don't know. And the truth is, I've never really had to think about how Beaver Builder approaches layout. So you can see it's got like this kind of clear fix thing going on, for example. I've never really had to learn this stuff because, and it's still using floats in some cases. So it seems like it's kind of a mix of approaches. And the truth is, I've never had to learn how Beaver Builder thinks about layout because it works. It works in different browsers, it works on different devices. And you know, the custom changes that I need to make, if I need to change the way something's styled, the custom CSS for that works. The thing I have had to learn how to do is, like, you saw this kind of like nested div sort of div hell thing that we were looking at, and you do have to learn how to write CSS that talks to the right thing in Beaver Builder, because you'll add a custom class to what you think is a Beaver Builder module. Well, what is a Beaver Builder module? But the actual thing you're trying to style is maybe 5 divs in, and that's just kind of a thing that, you know, I wish it were different, but I can't see a better way that you would build something like Beaver Builder without having that problem. So in terms of why is it better than the alternatives, like, yeah, I'll just go ahead and link the page builder review I've done. All of the major page builders in WordPress are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to kind of do what Beaver Builder does. But in my opinion, all of the major ones, and again, I have not tried Oxygen, but I have extensively worked with Divi, Visual Composer, and Elementor. Divi and Visual Composer are just like not, in my opinion, not well constructed. Like, there will be options that don't even make sense, or it's like you're trying to input you're trying to input a number, but the only interface you have for it is like a little sliding scale. It's just like not built for people who are used to working with precision. And Elementor is good. And it's actually kind of a lot more feature rich than Beaver Builder. There's a lot more stuff you can do with it, but it's also a little bit buggier. Like, the reason I like Beaver Builder is because it does this like incredibly useful thing, and it really, really works, and it doesn't break. You know, it doesn't like on somebody's iPhone 5 or whatever, it does, you know, things aren't like this. It actually works. The kind of the sturdiness of the software is what keeps me really locked into it. And Elementor is just kind of a little bit far enough on that like kind of shaky curve that I haven't really felt compelled to invest seriously in it, despite it being, I would say, more feature rich than Beaver Builder. And that's kind of the same story with the Beaver Builder theme as well. It's pretty much just sits there, the Beaver Builder theme. Something like Astra is very much more feature rich, but the Beaver Builder theme, what you get for that non kind of feature creepy thing is, well, it's not what you get for it. It's just the way that the Beaver Builder people build stuff is, it's not packed with features, but it's so incredibly solid. And so that's why I prefer Beaver Builder over the other things I've tried. And if and when I get a chance to try Oxygen, I'd love to add that to the list of things I have opinions about. Yeah, Kevin says that's it. Yeah, Kevin says that's helpful. You're very welcome. again, like there is no good way to create layouts like the one I just showed you other than a page builder. And, you know, for about 5 years in WordPress, there were bad page builders. And, you know, it was like, well, this is like, I get what you're trying to do, but this is creating a site that's so bad that it's, this is not worth using. I'm going to do it with widgets and I'm going to do it with shortcodes and that kind of thing. And then maybe 3-ish years ago, it started being that it was good enough to actually use. And that was kind of like probably the biggest change in the way I've used WordPress across my 10 years of using it professionally. Okay, Kevin, I'm starting to talk too much about this one topic. At some point, I'm going to do a series of webinars on Beaver Builder. But Kevin mentioned that like you don't have control. This stuff is not code; it's stuff living in the database. If the database gets corrupted, you lose it entirely. You can't put it under version control. All those things are true. That's everything you just said is right. And Beaver Builder is working on the accessibility side of what they do, but at this point, my understanding is that the kind of nested divs thing they do is actually not great for accessibility. It could be better. So I know they're working on it, but so there are trade-offs. I mean, there are trade-offs, but for me, it's been completely worth it. And I've had multiple, large client projects that I've been completely comfortable sticking Beaver Builder in front of, and it's worked just great. And the WP Shop homepage is built largely with Beaver Builder as well. So yeah, so it is a trade-off, but there are trade-offs, but I've been very willing to make them. Robert asks, if Beaver Builder is deactivated, does it litter shortcodes on the front end? Very good question. The answer is no. Beaver Builder has this graceful fallback to HTML, to just, classic editor HTML. Obviously, you lose, most of the layout kind of logic that you built up in Beaver Builder itself, but no, it gracefully degrades back to just like the classic editor experience. Visual Composer and Divi both are like, the moment you deactivate them, everything in your site is just like a broken mess of shortcodes. So that's one of many, many reasons why Beaver Builder is a lot more reliable than those other plugins. And doing everything with shortcodes is super slow and it's super fragile. So it's like, that might be the single architectural decision that Beaver Builder got right that those other solutions got wrong. Okay, what else? Does everybody understand actions and filters? Okay, here we go. Damashe asks, what do you like for local dev environments? I've tried a couple things. As I mentioned in the last call, I'm on Windows, which really kind of limits your options, just in life, I would say. MAMP is, they have a MAMP package for Windows, and that's what I use at this point. And I believe that's what David uses as well. It's simple. It's kind of no frills. It doesn't have. It's not highly opinionated about how you use it. It's just like, here's a local server. So yeah, I like MAMP. A lot of people are very passionate about various other local development environments. I think for good reasons, but for the simple stuff I do, I use MAMP. M-A-M-P. Robert says actions and filters would be good to cover. Cool. What would you like to know about them? That's kind of a silly way to ask a question and then say, yes, cover that. And then I say, okay, what do you want to know? But is there anything within that topic that would be, especially helpful? Everything. Sounds good. Okay, so let me see if I'm logged into the WP Shout courses site. Okay. WordPress hooks, actions, and filters, what they do and how they work. So this is a nice diagram, I think. Actions, so there's two kinds of hooks, action hooks and filter hooks. And they are left, oh, am I sharing my screen? No, I'm not. Cool. So the first thing to know is the terminology. There are action hooks that are created via do action, and there are filter hooks that are created via apply filters. And for the most part, if you're doing client work, you won't be registering new hooks. You will be using hooks that have already been registered, most often by WordPress. So like if you're hooking onto the init action hook, for example, that's present in WordPress core. Or if you're hooking onto the content filter hook, that's a filter hook that WordPress core itself registers. What both of these kinds of hooks are, both action hooks and filter hooks, is there's specific places where you can write a function that hooks into, in other words, adds functionality to the PHP processing in WordPress. So the main part when we talk about hooks, again, if we're doing client work, as opposed to building commercial themes and plugins where you would be using do action and apply filters very often, but for actually building, let's say, a small business website or something, what you're going to be doing is writing hooked functions, action functions and filter functions. You use add action to hook in an action function. You use add filter to hook in a filter function. So let me just give you an example of each. So the first, I'm going to do the action example first, actually, because it's a little bit simpler. So this action example, this is an action function. The name of the function is WP Shout action example. What does it do? When you call the function, it just prints out, in other words, echoes, WP Shout was here. So we've written our function, but so far, nothing will ever really call this function, so the code inside won't be run. That's where add action comes in. Add action is a WordPress function that can take many arguments, but it always requires two arguments. The first argument is the name of the hook that we're trying to hook onto, the name of the hook that we're trying to stick new functionality onto. In this case, that hook is called WP Footer. That's the name of the hook, the action hook that we're hooking onto. The second argument that add action requires is the name of the hooked function, the name of the function as a string, just in like little single quotes here, the name of the function that we want to hook on here. So taken together, this code says, listen, I want you to hook an action on to WP Footer. And the action function that I want you to hook on is called WP Shout action example. So when WP Footer runs, I want you to find the WP Shout action example function and I want you to run it. And when that function runs, WP Shout was here gets printed out. And the net effect of that is that WP Shout was here gets kind of printed at the bottom of the page. So that's a very simple example of using WordPress's action system, which is one half of its hook system. Let's look at a filter. The difference between a filter and a hook is that a filter always returns something. It always gives back. With a filter, you're given something to work with, you work on it, and you give it back. That's different from an action where you just do whatever you want. With a filter, you're always given something, you work on it, and you give it back. So this very simple example of a filter, we have a filter function. The function is called WP Shout filter example. What happens when WP Shout filter example is called is that there's actually an argument, a variable passed in, and that variable is called title. And inside the function, the word hooked, the string hooked with plus a colon, plus a space, gets added before the title, and then all of that gets returned back to the thing that called it. So this is a function we've defined our function, but so far it never runs. And now we've got add filter. So we want to add a filter onto the title filter hook. And what we want to do when the title filter hook runs is we want to run the WP Shout filter example function. When that function runs, it takes the title, it adds the word hooked onto the beginning of it, and it returns it back, and then WordPress continues on as normal. So the net effect of that is this. All the titles get the word hooked in front of them. So that's a very short kind of intro to the hook system. I did a webinar a few weeks ago specifically on the hook system, so I don't want to kind of duplicate that webinar, but you can find it if you look at our, here, let me just get the article title for you. And while I'm fetching it, really the hook system is one of the most difficult to understand things in WordPress because the names are not very clear, and how things work kind of seems like, you know, there are parts of the way it works that are very hidden from view, so the whole thing seems like this kind of random magic. So if you can understand the hook system, then at least kind of enjoy the fact that there's nothing in WordPress that you can't understand, because that is kind of one of the harder things to wrap your head around. So yeah, I just linked in the chat the article. It's called A Time to Learn WordPress, 2 Free Open Webinars and More. And you'll see a video recording of an entire webinar I did on the hook system. And hopefully that's helpful. Okay. Is it, okay, I want to say your name right. Is it Chai? C-A-Y. Chai or Kai? You can unmute yourself if you want to give me the right way to pronounce your name. Okay, I'm gonna, oh, go ahead.
Oh, it's K London.
K London, okay, cool. So Kay asks, are Genesis hooks the same as WordPress's hooks, or are they specific to Genesis? Very good question. And if you want to stay unmuted, we can kind of have a conversation about this. So Genesis's hooks, like any hooks, whether we're talking WooCommerce or a theme like Genesis or any other random plugin like Yoast has a million hooks sprinkled throughout it, those are all going to use WordPress's hook system, the same thing that we just talked about. They're not, they don't, nobody has created their own like roll your own hook system that is different from WordPress's. Everybody is using the WordPress hook system that we just talked about.
Oh, that's good.
Yes. Now, the specific hooks themselves, like, you know, Genesis do footer or something, those are hooks that custom hooks that Genesis has registered using do action and apply filters. So, you know, they'll do action Genesis, you know, footer or whatever. And Genesis, I find Genesis actually pretty hard to work with. I know a lot of people really, really love it. So, and I'm pretty sure they have good reasons, but I find Genesis hard to work with because everything is a hook. Like if you look at index.php in Genesis, it's just like do Genesis or some function named that, something like that. And you actually look into any of the template files and everything is hooked. Everything is like Genesis hook in header, Genesis hook in content, Genesis hook in sidebar. And it's like, it's really hard to find where the actual like PHP and HTML are. I think other people find it easier to work with, but I find it very hard to work with. But the point is, what Genesis is it's 1,000,001 custom hooks, all registered using WordPress's core hook system, the one that we just talked about. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, good, nice. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Yeah, any follow-up on that with respect to, you know, Genesis?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
Thanks.
You're very welcome. So we have maybe a couple minutes left. Anybody else? Anything else I can help with about WordPress as a software system? Robert says, I'm going to hit the WP Shout course hard this week, so I'll probably have questions next week if that's okay. That's more than okay. Yeah, I'd love to talk to you next week. Okay, how about I'll wait 30 seconds for maybe one last question that comes in. Otherwise, we'll call it good. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much. This was a pleasure. I'm going to publish this video. I've been making these videos public. Hopefully, everybody's cool with that. And so I'll have the recording for this video up in the next couple days. And hope to see you next week. I hope you guys are healthy. Hope you're staying sane. And nice to see you.